Well, hello and welcome to How to Be Insanely Great, like Steve Jobs, the late great Steve Jobs. My name is Marta Kagan. I'm at MZ Kagan on Twitter if you want to say hello to me there. And I'm going to be your host for this webinar. Now, my story starts back in July of 2008. That's the first time I created an insanely great presentation of my own. And I learned a lot from that. Well, for one thing, I learned that putting a four-letter word on the title of a business presentation is going to get you noticed. But I also learned a lot about design and shareability because in the first couple days of that presentation being posted to SlideShare, which if you're not familiar with SlideShare, it's sort of like the YouTube of presentations. Anyway, I posted it on SlideShare, this presentation, in July of 2008, and within a matter of days, it had amassed almost 500,000 views, which was completely mind-blowing to me. I was like, oh, whoa! But honestly, prior to this, I had never in my mind created an insanely great presentation. So I thought, is this a fluke? Like, how did this happen? So a year later, I decided to do the sequel. And I cleverly called it What the F is Social Media 1 year later. Well, that one did really well too. It got picked up by Mashable. Ben Parr wrote about it and sort of described it as the quintessential presentation that described, what social media was all about at the time, 2009, right? 2010, I decided we needed to have a trilogy for the series. That one also had over 600,000 views. And then a couple years later, you'd find me at HubSpot as the head of brand and buzz, where I created several of their most popular, most viewed presentations, including this one, What Would Steve Do? Lessons from the World's Most Captivating Presenters, where I first started sharing the things I'd learned about Steve Jobs and his presentation style. And that one kind of blew up the internet. I mean, it got, I think, 1.5 million views in the first 2 weeks it was online. It was featured on LinkedIn, and it continues and continues to grow and be real popular. And then just this past year, I launched my very first online course where I teach people how to create insanely great presentations and deliver insanely great presentations. And I did a insanely great presentation to promote it called Ace the Pitch. And that was featured by LinkedIn as one of the best slide shares of 2015. So many of the decks I've created over the past decade continue to be some of the most popular, most downloaded, most shared of all time. Collectively, they've contributed to over 10 million social views and over $100 million in venture funding. And now I was not trained as a presentation designer or a graphic designer. I have a master's in physical therapy. I kid you not. But I have studied from the greats. I've studied from people like Steve Jobs and many other amazing public speakers and presenters, people who could sell ice cubes to Eskimos and know how to captivate an audience and keep them at the edge of their seats the entire time. So I'm going to share with you today what I've learned over this past decade and from all these experiences, and what I think Steve would teach you if he were here today to tell you how to pitch it like he did. Now, one little caveat, though, before we get into the good stuff, which is that we only have not even an hour together, about 45 minutes. And as you can imagine, it's a little bit tricky to smash in, 10 plus years of experience and knowledge and learning into that time frame. So at the end of this training, at the end of this webinar, I'm going to show you where you can go to get more, because I know you're going to want it. So please stick around. I promise I'll make it worth your while. So I'm probably preaching to the choir when I read this quote to you from Nancy Duarte, who famously created the Inconvenient Truth presentation that Al Gore used a number of years ago. She says, presentations have become the de facto business communication tool. And I agree. But the bad thing is that most presentations make me feel like I look in this picture. Right? This like, oh, God, please don't make me stick a fork in my eye. I'd rather stick a fork in my eye. And the reason why is because most presentations look something like this. Just jumbles and jumbles of words and logos and blah. This is not a presentation in my mind. This is a document. A document split up onto 27 separate pages, nevertheless, a document. This is boring, right? I mean, nobody wants to sit through that. And here's the thing. People don't pay attention to boring things. They don't. We don't. You don't. I don't. There are way too many other things that we could be paying attention to that are competing for our attention. So boring ain't gonna cut it. So, I'm going to turn this question to you and say, how many boring presentations have you endured this week, right? Think about that for a minute. How many boring presentations did you endure this week alone? Well, on an average day on planet Earth, there are roughly 30 million presentations being delivered every single day. I'm going to go ahead and wager that 99% of them fall into the category of boring, confusing, meandering, lackluster, thrown together, amateur, not getting the results. Which is why I so appreciated this little cartoon I saw, which, scarily sort of predicts our potential future if we don't change things, right? We're all going to be sitting in that seat in purgatory with Satan himself trying to recruit us to torture people with PowerPoint. That's not what we want. That's why you're here, I hope, right? Now, the late, great Steve Jobs was never boring when he was presenting. Can't speak about the rest of his life, but certainly on that stage, when he was giving a keynote, he was not boring. He was extraordinary. Seductive. People actually called Steve Notes, as his keynotes were lovingly named, seductive. When's the last time you saw a seductive presentation or pitch? Think about that. Or magnetic, captivating. These are all words that have been used to describe Steve Jobs on the stage presenting. Insanely great being my favorite of them all, and insanely great being what I want to teach you to do on this webinar. So let's get into it. Here's how to be insanely great like Steve, boiled down to 5 simple but really powerful nuggets. You ready?